Well, Brandon Beane lives up to his reputation as a wheeler and dealer, only this time he shocked and maybe disappointed a segment of Bills fans as he moves down in the first round of the NFL draft. I am Andy Young with the Buffalo End Zone podcast, joined this week by Dan Russell, our chief meteorologist here, as well as football nut, high school football coach, former college football player, and a certified NFL draft enthusiast. So,
and big Bills fan, obviously.
Big Bills fan, so he's clued in on what we got going on here. What did you make of the Bills trading down twice and out of the first round?
Well, I think it did shock a lot of people, especially with some of the rumors of the Bills making that big move up to get that wide receiver target. But I think when all's said and done, with the way the draft board and how it fell last night with so many offensive players, the first 14 picks, never happened before, offensive players. And so for the draft board to go so offensive heavy, it kind of fell to the point where now I think the best part of this draft is the meat and potatoes of it now, the depth of the second, third, and fourth round picks. And that's what the Bills did. They played into what is the strength of now what is how that draft board fell to them, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting because all the talk about wide receiver leading into this, and the Bills, whether they wanted to say it or not, we all know there's a glaring hole there for probably a couple of wide receivers on this roster in the draft. And the Bills pass on Xavier Worthy at number 28.
The fastest guy.
The fastest guy in the history of the NFL scouting combine, runs a 4.2 140, which is just blazing speed. But he's only 165 pounds and didn't show a ton of stuff in route trees and things like that in his college career in the way he was used. But I think the people that are sticking to this point are concerned that they gave this pick to the Kansas City Chiefs. The Super Bowl champs, your arch nemesis, the team that you just can't get over that hump. And you send the fastest guy in the history of the combine to go play with Patrick Mahomes and for Andy Reid. I think that is why people are really emotionally kind of struggling with this
100%.
as we record this morning, in the morning after the first round.
Yeah, you know, and we've been talking this morning, and even Brandon Beane mentioned it in the post-press conference, that had they not picked him, there was no guarantee that the Chiefs weren't going to end up with him anyways. So they might as well get value regardless of what team they might be trading with. And when you look at Worthy as a prospect, you know, and I love his speed. You know, you got to love his speed. You can't deny that. And he has put up 3 years of decent production at Texas. He's not a one-hit wonder or anything like that. So he is a decent prospect. However, you mentioned it, 165 pounds. A lot of fans want to compare him to a Tyreek Hill. He's 25 pounds lighter than Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill's a more stout, physical, more muscular body. They're not the same player. They're not. Worthy is more of that down. He's more of what John Ross was when he came out, you know, several years ago when he ran a 4.2 40, and some of those other fast guys. So it'll be interesting. In my opinion, I don't think he'll ever be a number one wide receiver. I don't. I think he'll be more of a number two, more of an addition to an offense. And I think that's the way the Bills kind of look at him as well, and ultimately why I think they chose to pass, because they do need more of that true wide receiver that's going to be out there every single play. I mean, you look at last year, not just the snaps of a Steph Diggs, look at, you know, the snap count for Gabe Davis. He was out there even more than Steph Diggs 100% of the time. So they need that bigger body, that true X wide receiver on the outside.
You know, it's interesting, too. Brandon Beane was asked if he had any reservations about trading with the Chiefs. And you said it. There's no way that they could block the Chiefs from getting Xavier Worthy unless they took Xavier Worthy. The Chiefs could have traded up after the Bills pick. If the Bills didn't take him, they could have stayed pat and then take him at 32. The Bills on their board clearly didn't value Xavier Worthy at that pick. So then what do you want them to do? You don't want the Chiefs to force them to take a pick, a guy they don't want, just because you're afraid of him going to them, right? And so they can gain some value there through that trade. I'm okay with it. Like,
I am too.
There's that psychological part and there's that emotional part. I understand that, and fans at first glance are like, oh, my God, you gave this weapon to the Chiefs. But if the board didn't fall that way for Brandon Beane, you're not going to jump up and take Xavier Worthy when you know you could get other receivers that you might like more later in the draft.
And could you imagine, say we get Xavier Worthy in that spot, but then they draft a Lad McConkey or a Xavier Legette. They were going to get a weapon regardless. Obviously, that's what they were looking for. And what if that individual all of a sudden, well, why didn't we draft that? There's always going to be that Monday, armchair quarterbacking of the draft, especially in that moment. I was watching the draft with my son last night, and we were watching all these quarterbacks go. And what was it? 6 quarterbacks, correct?
Right.
Record amount of quarterbacks going. Just look at the history of the draft. There's never been 6 successful quarterbacks. So even with all the talk,
probably 3 of those will hit.
Maybe. I was telling him maybe 2. There might be actually 2 quarterbacks that hit out of those 6. And yet in that moment, where every one of these quarterbacks is a franchise quarterback, it's the quarterback that's going to take your team to the next level. In that moment, that's what it feels. But the reality doesn't actually fit. It doesn't fit that. There will be quarterbacks that aren't successful, that do fail. Meanwhile, in that moment, they're all future All-Pros.
It's hard to judge Brandon Beane on this right now because we haven't even seen them take a pick yet.
Yep.
So in a few years, it'll be fair to judge Xavier Worthy's production and spot in the league compared to what the Bills take here and what they do over the next couple of days and in future picks. I mean, we'll see what happens because they've got a lot of picks still to go.
They got 10.
And they can move around still. I want to go back to the idea that the Bills were going to trade way up into the first round, into the top 10 to get one of those big 3 wide receivers. We're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr., we're talking about Malik Neighbors, and we're talking about Rome Odunze.
Yep.
All 3 go in the top 10. Brandon Beane said after the draft last night, after the first round, that he never made a real serious attempt to get up that high, and nobody called him, despite lots of smoke out there that the Bills were going to do that.
They were trying to.
And I did, we're all having fun. I did a mock draft on SpectrumLocalNews.com where I had them trading into 9 with the Bears to get Odunze.
Yep.
Ultimately, though, he says he never went up that high to try to get one of those guys.
Well, it's one thing to talk about, and we always say you need a dance partner, right? It's because in this type of situation, it's one thing to talk about us and how much we're going to give up to get up there. But that team is also giving up potentially something. For example, the Bears, they're giving up a Rome Odunze to potentially now pair with your franchise quarterback that you just picked number 1 overall, to where they get to grow together. They get to be groomed together.
Plus, they have Keenan Allen and DJ Moore.
If they trade it back, though, they're not getting that caliber of player.
No.
So they're giving it up. They're, in essence, giving that up. What team's going to do that? So it's not just a matter of wanting to get up there. You got to have a lot of things come together. And the reality for any team in the top 10 to trade back, they realize what kind of potential player they're going to be giving up.
So then everybody kind of turns their attention to Brian Thomas Jr., and he was kind of the other flavor of the day. People saying he was that in that next tier maybe on his own, right? And it kind of played out that way. He goes to the Jaguars, who actually had traded back. And I think that may have changed what the Bills were wanting to do.
I think so.
I think if he had slid a little further, maybe they jump up, or there was a report out there that Brandon Beane tried to get up in that area and just couldn't do it. And he mentioned that he did make some calls in that area of their draft pick. I don't know exactly what that means. Was that in the top 20, right?
Yeah.
And it just didn't happen. He would have been a good player for the Bills there, and I think he fits that prototypical X-receiver role. I think that changed their plans once he went off the board.
100%. And even him, he wasn't he wasn't at the same level of those top 3.
No.
He wasn't asked to run many shorter intermediate routes. So
1 year of big production.
1 year of big. There were some question marks. There's the shoulder potential injury that had coming out, where he might have a torn labrum and might need surgery. And while it's a minor injury, it's still something that you put on your draft board and keep in mind when you're especially grading these players together. And I think when all's said and done, they got to 28. they have a bunch of players that are now graded together, and we can move back and still guarantee that we're going to get one of these guys.
All right, so now we switch gears to what's to come tonight. And this is a big night for Brandon Beane. They're actually going to make some picks, we think.
Yeah, right.
2 second-round picks. Obviously, they've got the top pick of the second round in number 33. And Brandon Beane said last night that they already had calls for that pick, and he wouldn't be averse to trading down again. But I would like to see them use that pick. And if I told Bills fans before the draft, they'd have their pick of Cooper DeJean, Jerzon Newton, the big defensive tackle out of Illinois, Adonai Mitchell, who was a popular wide receiver to the Bills in many mock drafts, Ladd McConkey, who we mentioned earlier, who's very good, Keon Coleman's still there. There's a lot of good players here at 33 if they want to take a pick right away in the second round.
Yeah, there was a lot of players that were mocked in the first round, and you just said it to the Bills, and it's not just those names. I remember there was a very hot name leading up. I saw one of the top draft prognosticators had Polk from Washington, the other big wide receiver from Washington, sneaking to the Kansas City Chiefs. So there is talent there, especially for the wide receiver spot. But there's also, you got defensive line talent that is potentially now slipped. You have offensive line talent that is potentially slipped. So there's definitely going to be good players. And as the Buffalo Bills need potential starters, I think coming out of this potential round.
You already mentioned McConkey. Why do you like him better than Adonai Mitchell?
He's somebody that I know can come in right away. Obviously, we're looking for that immediate starter. When we look at the roster, while there are holes, I don't see too many holes when it comes to starters, in my opinion. I think, just looking at the defense, they signed 2 safeties. We have our corners coming back. We have our linebackers coming back. We re-signed most of our defensive line. We even have Von Miller coming back. There really aren't many starters. Mm-hmm. And on offense, we have our offensive line. We have our halfback. We have our tight ends. When it comes to starters, there's really only one position there's a true glaring need, in my opinion, is wide receiver. So obviously we need this guy to come in and start right away. I think McConkey is that guy where he has the intelligence, he has the route tree already built into his repertoire of weapons. In fact, that's his strength, is his route running. Where have we heard that before?
Right. Steph Diggs.
Exactly. Where he sets guys up with head fakes. He does things that savvy veterans do that not rookies coming out of college do.
And he runs a 4.39, which surprised a lot of people at the Combine.
And he's a little bit bigger than your typical, for example, some of the other slot wide receivers that have come through the years, like a Cole Beasley, at 5'9", 5'10". He's 6 foot. He is. In fact, if you look at his height and weight, it's identical to guys like Steph Diggs, to Chris Olave, who was a first-round draft pick from Ohio State, who had the exact same 40 time, and to Garrett Wilson. Mm-hmm. They were all 6 foot, about 180, give or take 5 pounds, and known for their exceptional route running and hands. That is Ladd McConkey. So that gets me a little excited about what he could potentially do from the get-go. Now, is his ceiling as high as a lot of the other potential other prospects? Maybe not as much so, but I can guarantee his floor is a lot higher, though, too.
Right. I like Mitchell, too. I like McConkey. I liked either of those ideas, possibly in the first round.
Yeah.
I know with Mitchell, there's some talk about whether he didn't run full routes all the time, that he kind of showed up in flashes. But, man, he's your prototypical guy.
He is.
6'2", runs a 4.40, 4.3.
Great hands.
Yep.
Body. He's known for his body control,
right,
which is, that's a skill that not many are well aware of, is that body control and being able to adjust in flight. We all go back to that, for example, the Kansas City game this past year. And this is just an example, and this wasn't, it's Steph Diggs at the time, our number 1 wide receiver. It's the bomb down the field where Steph Diggs, it is right there. It's in the bucket, but Steph Diggs doesn't locate it. He doesn't have the body control to adjust his body to that perfectly. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not saying he doesn't have that skill. Obviously, Steph Diggs is an amazing wide receiver, but that's what body control is right there. That's what specifically, when we're looking for that trait, it's in that kind of a moment. Can he adjust left, right, and put his body in a position to catch the ball? And that's something that Mitchell does do very well.
besides those two, we've got Keon Coleman still out there, the massive wide receiver from Florida State. You mentioned Polk from Washington, McMillan from Washington, Troy Franklin, who was many at some points to be a first-round pick.
Yep.
He's a blazing fast guy, too. You've got guys like Roman Wilson, Javon Baker. All these guys, if the Bills don't want to take somebody at 33 and they decide to go to a different position, there's still a pretty nice group of guys there. I would like to see them take one of the bigger wide receivers right off the bat here. But you can make a case that at 60, or if they wanted to move further up, back up into the second round with some of the ammunition with 4 fifth-round picks.
I know.
Maybe they can do that. So maybe they take a Cooper DeJean here.
And then take that to move their second.
And then move up more towards the middle of the second round and grab one of that tier of wide receivers.
Yep, I was thinking that as well. Or even vice versa. You take the wide receiver at 33,
right?
And then you move up, and I'm a big fan of Zach Frazier. You know, and offensive lineman, 4-time state champion wrestler. And
Sean
I love that
McDermott DNA.
Boom, right there. So that is somebody who you could also see, I think, go by right around the middle of second round, and he's going to step in. In my opinion, he's going to be a starter for the next 10 years. Pro Bowler, right away. So that's another potential starter, right, that we could end up with. Because I know that left guard, while it's up for competition, that's still a little bit of a, up-in-the-air battle, as far as moving forward.
We had a lot of fun last night, members of the media, colleagues, at One Bills Drive, because after the draft finished, there was about a 45-minute waiting period to hear from Brandon Beane.
Okay.
Normally, Beane comes right out after the round is finished and talks to us right away. We were prognosticating. Is there something else going on behind the scenes here? It's fun to talk about. I don't expect this to happen, but could they make a play for like a Brandon Ayuk or a T. Higgins and make a trade with some of the capital that they've built up? I know they're up against the salary cap. They'd have to make some things work there, but that's also a possibility too, that they could go for one of these veteran guys who sound like they either want to be traded or on the trade block from their teams.
And now that first-round asset is no longer available for any team to give those teams.
No one was willing to do it.
And nobody was willing to do it.
So it drove the price down.
There you go. So it absolutely, I think the biggest you nailed the biggest, I think, question is not whether or not giving up the asset. It's, do we have financial flexibility to be able to do that? And with the way some of these wide receiver contracts that went down yesterday, A.J. Brown and Amon St. Brown, $30-35 million a year contracts. Those are huge, almost quarterback level contracts that are now going to these wide receivers. So
they're on the come up.
I would rather at this point, have a rookie contract and have this guy with this kind of salary for 4 years, building that, camaraderie and just with Josh Allen, moving forward,
being that guy for 5 to 8 years.
Exactly. And being cost-effective for at least the next 3 to 4.
Yeah, it almost strikes me as if the Bills were to make a move like that, say they went for Brandon Ayuk from the 49ers, who reminds a lot of people of Steph Diggs.
Sure, yep.
They would have to probably do almost like an NBA kind of sign and trade where San Francisco signs him to the big deal, and then there's a low cap hit in that first year to send to Buffalo so that they can get him under the cap, because Bills only really have like $3 to $4 million in cap space right now. They've got to keep that fluid for other little signings. And then obviously once June 1st hits, they get $10 million back on the books for Tre'Davious White, or off the books, I should say, on the cap. But they're going to use a lot of that for their rookie draft class. And, they still have a whole lot of players to sign even to get to the 90-man roster. So it would take quite a bit of maneuvering. I don't know how exactly the machinations would work to make that happen between the Niners and the Bills.
It would take some magic there.
They'd have to do some more restructuring, all those sorts of things. I know some people thought that they didn't max out the restructure they did on Josh Allen.
So they could do more there.
But they gave Deion Dawkins a raise. They moved some stuff around already. So I think it would take they could make it work, right? Like you could do anything you want pretty much if they really want to do it. But it would take a whole lot of work to make a move like that for an Ayuk or a Higgins now.
Yep, even Deebo Samuel was quote-unquote rumored to also be on the trade block. But like you said, I just think at this point it would take so much paperwork, finagling, and all of that just to make it a possibility. And then you got the assets that you're trading, and meanwhile you could draft, and you have the benefits, as I mentioned, of that rookie contract. And I think that we're seeing now that wide receivers are getting paid to the point where, just like it was beneficial at one point to have quarterbacks on their rookie contract, I think it's now going to be beneficial to have wide receivers on rookie contracts because of how inflated these contracts are getting.
Well, and it's like what Kansas City did with Miami in trading Tyreek Hill.
There you go.
Like, that guy's a stud. Everyone knows how great of a weapon Tyreek Hill is.
Yep.
But when Patrick Mahomes' cap number went up, the Chiefs decided our best route is to keep drafting young receivers. And they've drafted second-round guys. Now they draft a first-round guy. They take a swing on Kadarius Toney. So
and now 2 Super Bowl.
Right, and they won 2 Super Bowls
since
without great wide receivers, which is they're crazy. They're on a different level. But the thing that we were talking about too, and our former compatriot here, John Scott, we love you, Johnny.
Oh, yeah.
We were talking about the Bills. The only real star they have drafted is Josh Allen. Like in Bean's time.
Yeah.
Like star, league-wide star.
Yeah.
Diggs was a league-wide star, but they traded for him.
Yep.
And you get credit for that, for sure. Yep. You made the right move there if you're Bean. So to me, sometimes Bean has made great picks into good players. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Greg Rousseau, very good player.
Solid, but not a star.
Not a star. Ed Oliver, solid, but not a star.
Yeah.
Obviously the jury's still out on Kincaid. Elam has really even not got on the field yet.
Yep.
Even guys in the later rounds, I mean, they just haven't developed into those big league-wide names that I think sometimes you need. Like the Chiefs still had Chris Jones on the game record, game-changing type players. Do you feel like the Bills need to find a way to get some more of those type of players? Because it feels like they have, like Josh Allen's a top 3 quarterback, right?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really disputes that. But then beyond that, there's no stars on the team at this point anymore, like absolute stars now that Diggs is gone.
Now that we don't have the national star, I do think there are stars in the making, though, on this roster that have been drafted in recent years. I was a big fan of Dalton Kincaid last year when we drafted him. I predicted it. I wanted it. I wanted that pass-catching tight end. And
I think he's in store for a big year, targets-wise.
I think he's going to end up over 1,000 yards. I think he's going to have that level. I mean, we saw more than glimpses of it this past year because second half of the season, him and Shakir, they were our leading wide receivers. It wasn't Steph Diggs.
Right.
It was those two. And I think you're going to see even more of that and then more even for Dalton Kincaid. Remember last year, he was just a rookie. They don't get an offseason to work with Josh Allen and all that. They're getting ready for the draft, and he was coming off an injury on top of that. So he still put up a monster season as a rookie, for rookie standards, setting the record for the best tight end season ever for a rookie in Buffalo Bills history. And I just think the potential is through the roof, and he could be a potential star moving forward.
I think Cook could be a star too.
I was going to say
he really
Cook
came. I mean, he was third or fourth in the league in rushing.
Exactly.
He really came on
scrimmage yards. He was for a while there. He was right there with McCaffrey for scrimmage yards because he was receiving. He was getting the receiving yards. He was getting the rushing yards. He was doing great, and he's only going into his 3rd year.
Right. So I think there's room to grow there. Yep. I think Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have both mentioned this, though. They'd like to get more explosive.
Yes.
I think that's necessary.
Yep.
And I think Curtis Samuel can fit the bill to some degree there. His best season came under Joe Brady in Carolina, but he hasn't shown a ton of, he's a star. I think he's a good foundational piece on a team if he's used properly.
I'm interested to see what he's going to be able to do because he's never had a true opportunity. He's never had a quarterback.
Right.
He's 4 years in Carolina and 2 years in Washington, obviously. They've drafted quarterbacks the last, whether it's this year or last year with Bryce Young. So he's never had a quarterback. Yet here he is, a former 2nd-round pick from Ohio State, a big school, and he's never really had. I think this is going to be his first time he's had somebody to truly deliver him the ball, and so I'm excited to see what he can do. I'm not saying he's going to be a star or anything of that sort, but I am excited to see what Samuel can do.
All right, before we go, favorite idea tonight, and you've alluded to it already, I think.
I would be – well, one, we definitely got to get the weapon. We got to get the wide receiver regardless of who it is. There are still a lot of good names. If I could pick, my ideal scenario, though, it would be picking McConkey at 33. And then getting – I love the idea of getting Frazier there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe taking that one of those extra 5s and moving up, just a little bit, maybe 5-10 picks in the back end of the second, and getting that West Virginia center/guard if he falls.
Yeah, I'm in favor of McConkey, of Mitchell. I even would consider Coleman in that spot. And then I like if you want to go edge after that, if you want to go safety, if you want to go O-line, or some combination thereof, the Bills should be able to get 2 or 3 potential impact players tonight.
Real quick on Coleman, I think he is a bit of a Gabe Davis clone, even better, I think. But that's who he reminds me of when I see him. He's a great blocker. He's not going to beat people down the field as far as running past them, but he's a great contested catcher. Making those contested catches, and a great blocker. And he would be somebody that could go into the outside, probably never be a number 1, but could definitely be, as you said, a piece, an integral part of a team and an offense.
Mm-hmm. It would be interesting, too, if the Bills double dip on day 2.
That would be
I mean, they got 3 picks. Maybe take 2 wide receivers.
Why not?
Somebody else, right?
Why not?
Yeah.
They're out there.
Awesome. All right, good stuff, Dan. Appreciate it. We're going to wrap things up here on the Buffalo End Zone podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And you can, of course, find us everywhere you get your podcasts. Apple, iTunes, Spotify, all that good stuff. For Dan Russell, I am Andy Young. We'll see you Monday for a recap show on the draft. We'll cover it all on the Buffalo End Zone podcast.